So this week, our final week together, there's 3 chapters that are covered. The first one I'm going to discuss is students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And if you happen to have a student who has an IEP or a 504 plan with one of these types of diagnoses, you may see the acronym HH, which basically means hard of hearing. So we have deafness. Deafness is what you would know it to be, hearing loss so severe that a student experiences difficulty in processing linguistic information. And so when you think of someone having deafness, you think of no sound, pretty much. And if they do, they may hear a hum, but nothing to the extent of what we can hear like right now. To my knowledge, no one in this class has any type of hearing condition that impacts their learning. That's the reason why I'm using that example. Hard of hearing, once again, like many of the terms in this course, it is self-explanatory. And so basically that means that it's not as severe as deafness, but it does permit the individual from being able to understand spoken language, even with the use of hearing aids. Then you have residual hearing, and that's the remaining hearing, what's the hearing that is left over. If a person has hearing loss, you have congenital hearing loss, and we know that congenital means something that is present at birth. So this means sometimes babies are born without being able to hear. And then acquired hearing loss is what occurs if something happens and then, as a result of an accident or trauma, now the individual can no longer hear. You have prelingual deafness. That occurs before the child develops spoken language. Once again, self-explanatory, because lingual, I'm not really sure if they teach root words in school anymore, but when I was in school, they taught you root words and the meanings of prefixes and suffixes, so that way when you come across words that are not the norm, no one walks around talking, or no one walks around saying prelingual, right? Unless you work in this field or in speech therapy or with the deaf or hard of hearing. But anyway, prelingual, lingual being speech, also means tongue. Before, just one way to decipher it if you come across some terms in your career that you're like, what does this mean? Sometimes breaking it down helps. Postlingual, obviously post means the opposite of pre, so this is what happens. This is hearing loss that occurs after a child develops spoken language. And so, sometimes students will develop or acquire meningitis, and that can sometimes impact a person's hearing. Accidents happen, kids love to stick things in their ears, puncturing their eardrum, listening to loud music. Accidents, car, any type of head trauma. These types of things can all impact a person's hearing after they have developed spoken language, if they're old enough. Bilateral hearing loss, once again, leaning into the root words here, it means both ears. There's hearing loss in both ears. Unilateral, meaning that the individual has quote unquote normal hearing in one ear and then hearing loss in the other. And then there's the deaf community. And I have learned from teaching this course that there is a huge, I shouldn't say huge, but there is a huge deaf community, and they have certain norms within their culture. Many of the students who take this course have also taken other courses at Southwestern, Cuyamaca, etc. And they talk about taking the ASL class and how beneficial it's been. For the most part, the instructors, at least from the students that I have had, the teachers who taught it were deaf themselves. And so it gave them not only, obviously the education piece, but it gave them that personal insight into some of those cultural norms, the values, the attitudes, and their feelings about hearing aids, cochlear implants, which you'll see in a few slides. And so it's just one of those things, in this day and age of them talking about diversity and different types of cultures and intercultural competence. I often bring up the military culture, but when you're thinking of, and because sometimes people don't think of the military lifestyle as being a culture, but it is a culture all within itself. Being a person who was raised in the military culture, My dad was an officer in the Army, and then marrying into the Navy. And the Navy culture, you know, the military culture still exists, of course, but then there's certain norms and, you know, values and attitudes that come along with that. The same is true of the deaf community. And they tend to have very strong opinions about society, expecting them to be able to hear and to use sign and, you know, things of that nature. Because in some cases, those who are deaf, they don't feel that they actually have a disability. You know, it's society um, placing that attitude on their culture. Students who do have hearing loss attend school for the most part in the regular school setting. And so in that case, you can just consider it to be the general education classroom, as you can see from this chart. And it still holds true today that students for the most part get along just fine in the general education classroom. In some cases, some students will take part in schools that are just for students who are deaf. Currently, there's only, at least to my knowledge as of today, there's only one university in the United States that is only for those who are deaf, and it's called Gallaudet University. And I'm hoping I pronounced that word right. It's either Gallaudet or Gallaudet, but it's Gallaudet. I have one of my high school friends works there. I say that as if I was the one responsible for getting her that job, but I was not. But she does work there, and she, you know, learned ASL, and she speaks very highly of not only the school, but just working in that community and being able to, you know, dive into a culture that is not a norm for her. But she speaks really, really highly of just, you know, having learned another language, because that's what ASL is, as well as in just the deaf community and how they function in this society that isn't always open to people with differences. There are some times where those who are deaf may end up in a self-contained classroom, and that would be the special education classroom. There's a resource room. In that case, the resource room looks different it looks different in different districts. So resource room could also be pull out, you know, maybe going in with a counselor, or, you know, maybe with an audiologist, which is someone who focuses on finding services, devices, resourcing those with hearing loss. And then it says other, and then, you know, in some cases people may be homeschooled or have a different way of, you know, having their educational needs met. This is an example of a cochlear implant. And this is the outside piece that if you've ever seen anyone with one implanted, they usually have they will have that part of their scalp shaved. And the cochlear implant, the implant is actually inside of, I don't want to say inside their brain, but it's in their head, it's inside their body. And from there, you know, it has this transmitter that goes into here that talks to the hearing nerve, and then out here is the headpiece, and it attaches with a magnet. And so individuals are able to disconnect, take off this piece when they don't want to hear anymore. And in previous classes, one young lady shared that she had a student who had the headpiece, had the cochlear implant, but they would have to let him know to keep it in all day long, because if a teacher started talking and they didn't want to hear what they had, if the student didn't want to hear what the teacher had to say, he would just take his headpiece off, and it would be like, no, 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 we're actually still learning. You need to put that back on. So once again, you have to be cognizant of these things, because you may be talking to a student who has one and thinking they're getting everything, and they may have simply taken it off. There's different degrees of hearing loss. Normal range, you know, and in a slide or two, you're gonna be able to see different activities that definitely fall within normal range. You know, nowadays, they're saying, they being experts and scientists and researchers, saying that children at younger ages are losing their hearing faster or having diminished hearing because of, you know, the great headphones, whether they're over the ear or they're their earbuds, and then they're, you know, plugging them into their ears, and they're just hanging in there all day, and it's the constant sound. And depending on how loud they're listening to it, you know, it's impacting not only their current hearing, but the development of their hearing as well. And in some cases, if a person has enough trauma to their eardrum and everything that goes on with the hearing, the sense of hearing, it could lead to permanent hearing loss. There's different types of ways for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing to communicate. Of course, there's the oral English approach, speaking it orally, auditory to oral, auditory to verbal. You may see some people engaging in simultaneous communication approaches. So that means you're using a communication approach in addition to something else. There have been people that I have come in contact with who are deaf or hard of hearing who not only read my lips, but, they also sign. They may also talk a little bit in sign. They may, when I'm talking to them, they may ask me to slow down so that I can, they can read my lips a little bit better. The interesting thing that has come up, and most people, unless you are already in this line of work, didn't realize, but with everyone having to wear face coverings now, there are individuals due to their disability that rely on reading lips. And obviously with the face mask, with most of them, you can't see lips, you can't read facial expressions that well, all the things. So there are some companies that are recognizing this and now are making clear face masks. And so that helps a little, except for the fact that, I think the first people who jumped out there tried kind of like this plastic or whatever, because you can imagine, I don't know about anyone who's listening, who, if this also affects you, but it gets really hot under those masks. And if you start talking a lot, imagine having plastic over you. It's just instant annoyance, like at least for me, like instantly annoyed. And now they're telling those who can't wear masks, regardless if they're deaf or hard of hearing, and they rely on reading lips, to now invest in the face shield. So that way it's clear, you're still protected, and their needs are still being met. There's also dual language approach. That's once again using, ASL with English or ASL with their, native language. And then it could be just total communication. Sometimes people have hearing loss later on in life and they continue to be able to speak. I'm not sure if anyone in this class has ever heard of Marlee Matlin. I'm not sure if she still acts as much as she used to back in the 80s and 90s or so. But she is an actress who is deaf, and she uses sign as well as in just her speech. And so she has gone through intensive therapy and stuff to be able to speak at a tone, not a tone, but speak in a way that is makes her language understandable to most. And it works for her and for those around her, because basically everyone must have their needs met, with an ability or with a disability or not. When it comes to the ASL community, facial expression is a very large part of their grammar. They're very, very expressive. Usually around this time, I include a clip to, there was one particular interpreter who was at I believe like a Wu-Tang concert. And she was this older lady who, you make the assumption that she probably does not listen to the Wu-Tang Clan. And she had to interpret their concert. And she really got into it. And it was just more entertaining, honestly, to watch her sign this rap song than to actually listen to the rap song. Let's see. And so lastly, you have the understanding the audiogram. So when an individual needs to have a hearing test, if there's a suspicion that they are experiencing hearing loss or have maybe lost the hearing in one of their ears, an audiologist will do an audiogram and will require a hearing test, and out of it will come an audiogram, which will tell you where the hearing is at certain levels with certain sounds. And so in the previous slides, we talked about what would be profound hearing loss, a little bit of hearing loss, moderate. You think of things like rustling leaves, very calm and quiet. And you think about the blowing of a fan, which can be actually a calming technique for many. These are all like normal things. And then as you get into the louder sounds, like dogs barking, of course that takes into account if it's a smaller dog, bigger dog. Right here, it seems like they have like a beagle. They tend to have more of a yappy, high pitched. You have your cell phone, obviously a very, very old school cell phone. And then you're getting into the louder sounds. Like if you listen to or you're around machinery a lot, lawnmowers, tillers, bulldozers, you'll notice that those people wear some type of ear protection um, to help muffle the sound that they're hearing all day long, especially if you see like the construction workers. If you've been out at all in these last few weeks, it seems like road construction or something dealing with the road is going on everywhere. And for the most part, you see people wearing some type of covering over their ears or earbuds. What I found interesting, which has nothing to do with this particular chapter, is the amount of construction workers you don't see wearing a mask in close proximity. But that's a whole different conversation. And then, of course, you have planes that are very, very loud. And so you definitely see the men and women out there on the tarmac with headphones on, you know. And even if you've ever taken a baby to a concert, which begs the question, why would you take a baby to a concert? But there are people who have taken babies to concerts, to sporting events, you know, anywhere there's going to be a lot of noise. They too will have on headphones, you know, that cover the whole ear to help muffle out how intense the sound is. And that is deafness and hard of hearing.